All right. Question number one has to be who decided to put such blue language in the title of this book? Was that you or the publisher or the editor?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's not that. Let's face it, it's not that blue these days. I mean, it
It's
was.
not at all.
Is it Michael Manson or Michael Mason or whatever he's called? He's written about 6 books, all with "fuck" in the title, I think, hasn't he?
Yeah,
And then everybody, yeah. So mine's positively demure compared to that, I think.
that's
But
right. Yours is shy and retiring.
yeah, mine's trying to try. So it's me anyway. In fact, actually, I had quite a long debate. It was. I don't want to make more of it than it is, but it's actually an interesting question because it was a working title when I kind of came up with it, and it's actually it's quite a useful, helpful title to write to because it kind of gives you something to push against. It sort of says like that, I'm going to be the kind of iconoclastic anti-establishment leadership voice, or at least aspire to be, let's say. So it's quite good in that sense, but it was quite a long time, quite close to publication. We had quite a lot of debate. I had some debate with myself as to whether that was the right title to go with, but in the end, I'm glad I did because I think it really helps to stand out on shelf. I think for that reason.
Yeah, well, let's stay on that thread because I think if we say what is bullshit and why should there be a book called No Bullshit Leadership,
Yeah.
we can probably gobble up the whole hour. How does somebody who objectively, Chris, has real pedigree be the spokesperson for such a message? So Oxford, Harvard, CEO roles, managing director roles in advertising, CEO and chairman of Havas UK. Are you the right flag bearer for No Bullshit? Isn't it the case that you're actually sort of pedigreed and institutional?
Well, so somebody was in a slightly different context. Somebody was explaining to me about the kind of the great let's say rule-breaking artists of the mid-20th century, Picasso's, etc. of this world, and their argument went that of course Picasso looks like he's a revolutionary, which he was, but he also was before he was a revolutionary, he was an absolutely superb craftsman. He understood the rules in order for him to break them, and I think that's my kind of slightly pretentious bullshit answer to the question, but I think there's some truth in that. But I suppose I wrote the book based on more on my experience, and I think I wrote it primarily, actually, or let's say the catalyst, the real sort of meat of my argument I sort of formulated during 5, 6, 7 years when really I felt at the time, and I feel still today, that I was failing, that I got a lot of stuff wrong, that I wasn't leading effectively at all. And I think probably without that, which at the time, by the way, was pretty unpleasant. I mean, it wasn't an enjoyable experience, and I really thought I'd kind of screwed my career. But I think by a bit of judgment and a bit of luck, got myself out of that position. And I think once I think that gave me possibly the clarity or the sort of attitude, if you like, to say, you know what, I've worked out for myself through my many failures what I think leadership is. I think I've convinced myself and maybe some others that I've done that I've then been a good practitioner, and therefore let's try and write it down. So I think it was more to do with my own period of failure than it was necessarily my qualifications or what have you.
Yeah.
Academic qualifications, let's say.
When you're if I can sort of take you back to the days when you're producing a ton of manuscript and it isn't yet, have a lot of it on the cutting room floor, and you sort of envisioning, or even now maybe, Chris, you're envisioning who's sitting there, on a park bench, leafing through this book, or on the commute home or what have you. Did you have sort of an ideal readership in mind, like somebody you would particularly hope is reading this?
That's a great question. I can make up an answer. The honest answer is, when I was writing it, no, I didn't. But partly because I formed, when you well, certainly I felt that if I was going to sit down and write a book about leadership, I had to define for myself what I thought leading and leadership were. What was a leader? And I quite explicitly in the book spell that out, and people are free to agree or disagree with my definitions, but I said this is what a leader is. And part of my kind of, if you like, iconoclastic approach was to say, actually, the people most leaders aren't the people we think about when we think of leaders. Most people in leadership positions aren't CEOs, presidents, prime ministers, whatever it is. My definition, anybody that has people they're responsible for is a leader. And I really wanted, and I want this even more now, I think. I really wanted to try and change let me be really ambitious, societies, the conversation we have as a society around what leadership is, because I think we misunderstand it. And I think many people listening to this, if not virtually everybody listening to this, will be in a position that we don't typically think about, which is they are in leadership positions, by my definition, which is they will have people they're responsible for, but also they will have bosses in turn. So as we move through our career, the balance between the two shifts. Early in our career, we have more people who we are responsible to upwards than we are downwards. And then if we have if we get promoted, that balance shifts. And in time, perhaps you have more people ultimately that you're responsible for downwards to upwards. But throughout our careers, we have responsibilities in both directions.
Yeah.
And I think they're different, but they are linked, and they're linked, I think, in terms of beneath us, we need to create an environment where people can perform at their best. And above, we also need to help the people we work for perform at their best by doing our job well and understanding what they need from us. And so it's a long-winded answer to your question in a way, but I think that change in terms of how we think about what leadership and who leaders are is really my ambition, rather than say, I'd like this to be a kind of a sort of a 35-year-old who wants to get promoted. I think it isn't that.
Well, I think you uncovered what was at the root of my question, which is it's one of those things where if early on people get some guidance as to what leadership is, they've got a lot of runway to benefit from that guidance. On the other hand, if people have maybe been just enveloped in really conventional leadership, a style of leadership that you rail against it at a few points in this book, it's not like, oh, it's too late, I've only got 5 years of leadership left or something like that. It's actually maybe their window to just say, hey, that there's a different way to impart and teach this toolkit, or even just to make some revisions for themselves.
Well, I think that so yes to all of that. And if organizations and individuals and us ourselves, and I talked about my sort of 7 years in the wilderness, if you like, and I knew that I had at the time a job title that suggested that I was a leader. My job title was a managing director. That's a leader's job title. But I didn't. I failed as a leader in the sense that I think leadership ultimately is about getting stuff done. I mean, there's a hard metric. I mean, if the teams that you're running would perform just the same if you weren't there, then why are you there, right?
Right.
And so as a leader, you have to be creating an environment that means that people are achieving things that they wouldn't do if you weren't there. And I think that you can apply to everybody that people that have 4 people working for them or people that have 40,000 people working for them. But interestingly, I think the people that have 40,000 people working for them, they're not going to achieve all that they might if they don't have those people right through the organization, right down to the people that only have 4 people working for them, creating environments where those people are achieving more. And so this idea that I think leadership, organizations that are able to see leadership as something that meaningfully runs through the whole of the organization will outperform those that don't. And everybody, again, what is the almost the bullshit of the subject is typically kind of just the opposite of what I'm saying. So, a lot of organizations will claim, yeah, we have leaders right through the organization. Do you? Do you treat? Okay, so what are you doing to try and improve those people's understanding of what leadership is, improve those people's skills? And it seems to me that is a, the organizations should and would benefit from a more overt and direct investment in real leadership skills right the way through. In my experience, not many do that well.
Let me maybe share with you one of the great challenges that we've seen as we've been interviewing authors on the subject of leadership. At root is some problems with the language. There's ambiguous terms, and there's terms with a ton of overlap, and so you get things like coach, mentor, leader, manager, and it can just get used interchangeably, or some organizations will sort of ban and banish one of those words, or put one of those words on a pedestal. So we're going to steer everybody who listens to this, just get the book and read it, right? We're not trying to get you to just read the book in 40 minutes here. But can you say a couple of words about what leadership means, not in the broad sense of the word, but just as compared to management, that word?
I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the word management, but I have spent a lot of time thinking about the word leadership. I'll start with leadership. For me, leadership is about getting stuff done. Leadership is taking a group of people from a defined start point in the present to a different and clearly defined place or state that exists in the future. So leadership is all about movement and change. That's what leadership is. I mean, the clue is in the word to lead. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I mean, but nobody listening to that is going to go, wow, I never thought about that. But actually, a lot of people listening to it will work with and for people who are in leadership positions and tangibly and measurably don't do that. Okay, so it's the doing that's difficult. For me, management, I suppose, like I said, I think management isn't leadership. Leadership is what I've described. I guess I see management a bit as more of a sort of a status quo type role. But you know what? I mean, if you want to say, hey, for me, management and leadership are interchangeable words, and I'm fine with that. The point is, the outcome is fine, but it has to mean movement and change. So if you want, so for example, like this is a slightly weird example, but in Premiership football teams, the leader is called the manager. Okay, so the person in charge of the team is called the manager. I mean, fine, okay, everybody, but nobody's in any doubt. There's no ambiguity about that person's role, right? In fact, it's an extremely clarifying position. I mean, they either do improve the position or they get fired. I mean, that's true of lots.
And there's a beautifully objective way to figure it out, because you could just go online and see a little table with boxes in it.
Exactly, and they're called the manager. So I think the point is the understanding the most important thing is understanding the purpose and role of the person in leadership positions. And if you really push me, in my, if I had to really say, I would say, generally speaking, leadership is about that movement and change, and management might be a bit more about kind of looking after the status quo. But yeah, best I can do.
Okay, super. Well, we didn't want to force you into some random dictionary, Webster's dictionary definition game. It's just that has been on the mind of us leading this series of conversations. And I know our listenership, our community, they really spend some time thinking about, do we want to train our managers, or do we want to cultivate leaders, and so on and so forth. And I think your book will speak a lot to both scenarios, which is the reason that I just brought that distinction up. I think your answer is fine.
Well, what I would say is, but by all means, like if you're an organization, you have a clear definition of those two things, and they both, and you decide, they're different things and I need them both. If that's what you conclude, then clearly you need to make sure the people doing those two things, you're coaching and training them, developing them to do it. That is for sure. But what I would say is that the most important roles of people, the most important roles for any organization is developing leaders. It is absolutely leaders by my definition. If you want to call them managers, that's fine. But by my definition, that's what you need. You have to have those people, because if you look at any organization, and over the past 3 years, I've been responsible for, and I've worked with, I've got directly responsible and worked with over 100 individual businesses, every continent, all sorts of different sectors of the market. And what you discover in every organization, and all organizations have challenges all the time, and when you peel away the layers of those challenges, eventually you get to the problem, and the problem is always leadership. Ultimately, it's leadership.
Really?
Yeah. It always is. And I mean, look, I'm not an expert on production lines in factories, right? But I guarantee if you've got a problem on the production line in the factory, at the end of the day, you're going to find that the problem is about leadership, whether that be how you construct it, how you run your production processes, whatever it is. And the only solution is better leadership. Really, the only enduring long-term solution is better leadership. And that's why, organizations need to invest in it and understand it and invest in it.
So tell me a little bit about bullshit, because you can start to articulate the specific ways in which bullshit has crept in, or maybe always been, held sway in the heights, in the lofty heights of management and leadership. But what is it that's the enemy here? If you're railing against bullshit in leadership, what's comprised in that?
I think I don't have. I think there's not a single answer to that, but on a kind of a macro level, I would say that around leadership, there is what I think I refer to in the book as the leadership industrial complex, right? And there's a big industry around leadership, whether that be management consultancies, whether that be business schools, and I've attended one, whether that be conferences, training programs, books. I mean, I've written one of those too. And I think that this industry kind of has a vested interest in creating this sense of an elite or untouchable knowledge. There's a kind of an elite cadre you can kind of be informally inducted into, if you've been to the right school, if you've been to the right program, once you have, for example, the right job title, for example. And that's certainly kind of how I felt. I didn't behave and see myself as a leader until suddenly I had the right job title. And I think this, well, first of all, it's not true. There isn't an elite and untouchable knowledge. There isn't a leadership type. We know that from our own personal experience, because we've all worked with lots of different people in leadership positions. Some have been good and some have been bad, and there's not a personality type that links those two. And I think this creates this bullshit creates real world problems. First of all, it inhibits people who are already in leadership positions from fulfilling their potential, because it just covers the subject. It gets in the way of people achieving what they might, or what they should be able to achieve. And second of all, I think potentially worse, I think it excludes whole swathes of society from believing that leadership is something that they can aspire to. And you know, and there is no question we need more better leaders everywhere. I mean, it's a self-evident truth. Everywhere we need better leaders. Every organization, not just businesses, you know, our societies, our governments, our hospitals, our schools, all benefit. We all see the ones that have good leadership and the ones that don't, right? And leadership is achieving effective results. And so by wiping that away is the benefit of us all. And you know, and for me, leadership is difficult but not complicated. And I that's not a phrase I came up with. I don't know. I don't know who did. But I think it is true. And that's really, if you like, the organizing idea of the book. Leadership isn't complicated, but it is difficult to do well. And so what I tried to do is spell out, you know, the key ways to think, the key places to focus, and the key ways to behave, and indeed then ultimately to look after yourself. And if you're going to be an effective leader.
Did you, as you were writing, and I guess more broadly in your career experience, feel like some known leaders were just great examples of what you feel is the right template?
So the honest answer to that is no, not really. And that's not to say there aren't any, by the way. But I, of course there are. There's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. But no, I wasn't writing with anybody in mind. I was writing what I was writing to clear away bullshit. I was writing to try and clarify what I understood leadership to be, based on, I suppose, a kind of 6-year period of quite significant personal failure, and then a 6-year period that followed that of you know, relative personal success in leadership positions. Yeah.
Well, I sort of asked the question, not to be tricky with you, but that, of course, the kinds of leaders that you're going to be finding and addressing when you think about the way in which you're talking about leadership are going to be unsung heroes, people who are sort of maybe behind a veil. They aren't going to necessarily be luminary, because your definition has been anyone who's responsible for others, which means that they're all over the place.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. But I suppose the majority of leaders, the majority of leaders are unsung. I mean, you know, the majority of leaders aren't going to have a Harvard Business School case study written about them or their success, which, by the way, doesn't mean that you haven't achieved remarkable things. I mean, that's still a big group of people who've achieved incredible things. And I think many of those people, depending what we mean by unsung, I mean, you know, the people that people that run successful departments in schools, I mean, those people make a huge impact on their local communities and on the lives of the people that they come into contact with. So I suppose they're pretty well sung. What's the opposite to unsung? they're frequently
lauded.
Sung to the people that they come into contact with, even if
lionized.
They don't. Lionized. Exactly. And lionized. I mean, really change people's lives. And I think, by the way, I think that great leadership has the power to do that, and great leaders do that, whether they be, you know, let's say, lionized within a discrete community, or lionized within a in a more public sense.
One of my intellectual heroes is Edmund Burke. He talks about the little platoons of life. This, like, you know, they're and I think those little platoons have leaders throughout them, and so that could be the ancient coin collecting enthusiast club with a full membership of 8, but so be it. And there's somebody who's right at the helm, just carrying the banner for that little platoon.
And that is how I see it. I mean, I think that, you know, this is for people that, like I say, that run 40,000 people businesses, or, you know, maybe I'd quite like a few leaders of political parties to read it, perhaps, through to, or as you say, all of these myriad of people in leadership positions who I think, if you look at it, and leadership is something that you know, is it about others or is it about you? And I think that's a kind of interesting question. I mean, I think the effect you have is on others. I mean, the leadership is about creating an environment where people can achieve, you know, a team of people, whether it be the coin collectors or whoever, who can achieve things they wouldn't achieve if you weren't there. So that is without question a key metric for a leader. But also, I think then the inward version of it, I think if you're somebody in that position, whatever that position is, being able to lead effectively is incredibly rewarding for its own sake. You know, I mean, if you're going to do something, you want to do it well. So whatever that is. It doesn't all, you know, not everything is a competition. You know, there are leadership roles that aren't competitive, but they still have their own measure of, you know, like, I don't know, if you're running a hospital ward or something, you know, there'll be somebody in charge, and it'll be possible to do it well, and it'll be possible to do it badly. I mean, like anything, like absolutely anything in life, right? And the basic skills of leadership, I think, are pretty universally applicable.
You've got this this diagram in your book, which is it looks like almost like two little coasters, which is like where you are, where you want to be, both of which you mark as easy. That got my eye. I thought, wait a minute, this might be a typo or something, except for that the little the little bridge arrow that shoots between them says really hard underneath it.
Well, that's actually that was the first thing. When the catalyst for writing the book is I was asked to do a presentation. This is probably like 2017 or something. I was asked to do a presentation to a group of you know, like next generation leaders. I don't know, like late 20s or something like that, on leadership. And I thought, okay, fine. Yeah, sure, no problem, I'll do that. And like a lot of people, you know, 2 days before the presentation, I thought, what am I gonna say? And then at about the same time, I discovered that I'd been asked to do this presentation, and I was like the filling in a sandwich. So there was actually 3 of us who'd been asked to do the same presentation to this group of people, and the other 2, I can't remember who they were, but they were kind of real sort of, you know, business luminaries, and I thought, oh my God, not only have I got to think of something to say, but suddenly this is a kind of a competitive environment, right? I've got to kind of hold my own here. So I thought, well, what can I say about leadership that hasn't just been said 100 times before? And so I drew that little diagram with where are you, you know, leadership has one of 3 components. Where are you today? You have to be able to answer that question. The leadership industrial complex will sell you tons of consultancy around that. Don't buy it. It's not a very difficult question. You have to answer it, but it's not a very difficult question to answer. Where do you want to get to? Well, I mean, when you asked me, you know, where the bullshit comes in, that is, I mean, the bullshit that is sold on the subject of visions, purposes, big, hairy, audacious goals, whatever it is, the bullshit around that almost defies belief. And my argument is, it's a really important question, but that isn't a difficult question either. So don't treat it like it is. But actually, we haven't got to leadership yet, you know, and in fact, that's, you know, leadership is the journey between the 2, and that's really difficult. And that is where is leadership. And in fact, I think when we talk about how does the bullshit get in the way, that whole sort of setting objectives, whatever word you want to use, again, I'm pretty relaxed. Again, you asked about people becoming hung up on words. This is a space where people become hung up on words. What's the difference between a purpose and a vision and an objective? And I'm like, if you want to have, I think they all do the same thing. If a different word works for you, that's fine, but they all do the same thing as far as I'm concerned, which is simply set a territory that you're going to aim for, and don't get confused into thinking that setting that territory is leadership. It's not. A leader needs to do it, but that is not leadership. Leadership happens when you start to move between the two. And in that sense, I drew them that diagram, and I thought, well, I wonder if I can get a book out of this. Basically.
Got it. Well, we won't tell everybody that, otherwise they'll just download the diagram and be like, I read Chris Hirst's book.
Exactly.
Either that, or we got to charge them the same price on the Kindle for the diagram as for the whole manuscript.
Exactly. You can have the 50,000 word version, or the one version.
Yeah. Well, that I think will help people understand what you're referring to as bullshit, in particular the apparatus, all the architecture around selling people ideas, ways, frameworks, and so forth on how to think about where they need to get to.
And I think it is important. It is that you can't lead. It's by definition, you can't lead somebody anywhere if you don't know where you're going to. So you have to define where you're going to get to. But I've been part of leadership teams. I talk to leadership teams that either worked for me or I'm helping. And sometimes it's not uncommon for teams to treat that question as such almost as a sort of a sign of their leadership virility, that they need to come up with something incredibly clever, really clever, insightful, unique answer to that question, and you don't. And in fact, the question around unique, I think, is quite interesting. We're quite often encouraged by the leadership industrial complex to come up with a unique answer to that question, where our business, whoever we are, we have to have a unique definition of where we're trying to get to. And of course, guess what? Leadership teams find that incredibly difficult to do, because virtually no businesses are unique. In fact, I find it quite hard to think of one that is. Virtually all businesses are trying to do a common thing better than the competition. And actually that's what leadership is about, that you try and do a common thing. The question is how you do it better. And in all sectors, some people do it dramatically better than the competition, and some do it dramatically worse. But it's the how, not the what, that differentiates.
Sage is headquartered in Singapore, and there was an incredible statesman, maybe him, Lee Kuan Yew.
Yes, absolutely.
Who built Singapore up. One of his, well, to be fair, he built it with a very talented team as well.
Everything is always a team. Let's be clear. Everything is always a team.
Yeah, but he certainly was a leader. I mean, you want to talk about where people were and where they ended up. Holy smokes.
Yeah.
One of his recognized quotes is, "I never heard of a man who became a leader as a result of undertaking a leadership course."
There you go.
Well, I thought you'd like that as a.
Although I have developed, just for your listeners are clear, I agree with that, with the exception of my leadership course, which I've just developed, which I can recommend.
No. A part of just fueling the leadership industrial complex one step further, Chris. How dare you? How dare you play for both sides? But anyway, I think there is something at the heart of that quote, which is that you don't exercise or evince or show or demonstrate leadership because you studied it, can talk about it, have gone through the visioning exercise.
It's a doing word. It's all about doing. I do think, though, that you can teach people how to lead better. So that's, I don't think, I mean, who am I to disagree with him? I'm not really disagreeing with him, but I don't think it's an entirely like, what's the word, an entirely sort of hit and miss process. I think it is a skill that you can develop and learn. And in fact, I read a great fact that said that the best way to predict whether somebody, from an early point in their career, the best way to predict whether somebody will go on to be a high flyer or, you know, a high achiever later in their career is if their first boss is in turn a high achiever or a high flyer. And, you know, so that says to me that you know, there are skill. I mean, otherwise, why write the book? I mean, the point of writing the book is to say leadership is something that you can learn. It's a teachable skill. Now, you know, I think there are three things we need in order to learn anything, a musical instrument, a sport, or whatever. And they are quality of tuition. We need to be, who are we learning from? Our willingness to learn. So how willing are we to learn from our mistakes, take advice, take feedback? And three, hard work. I mean, I think those are the three things, and you can apply those three to pretty any situation. You know, you and I could take up a musical instrument today, and you know, if we applied those three things, we would be dramatically better in 12 months' time. Now, it might turn out that you have a little bit of extra natural ability, but that's going to be in the margins. Most of the improvement is going to be with those three things, and I think that applies to leadership as well. And so my book isn't just about wiping away the bullshit. It is that, but it is putting it beneath that bullshit is a framework. That's the way the book is constructed to work. It's not to say, hey, all of it's bullshit. There's, you know, just get out there and good luck. That's not it. It's like there's a lot of bullshit you can ignore, but there's a fundamental framework that if you can follow, you will be a better, more effective leader. And so that's my ambition.
What are you doing with the course? Tell me about the course.
So the course, about 18 months ago now, I started working with two. I don't know anything about training. So I know my limits, but I worked with two people that do, and they've taken the bones of the book, turned that into it's a 6 or 8 module training program. It's delivered in person or online, and the intention is you take groups of 8 to 20 people, typically teams that work together. It could be next generation leaders, senior executives, or sort of leadership teams, and help them develop their collective leadership skills. I mean, I think that leadership is something that's done. I think that leadership is something that's done as a collective. You know, I think that, yes, we have to look at our own individual skills, but it's about it's partly about how helping teams learn how to be more effective together. So we've developed that's aimed at, if you like, corporate organizations. So we have that program that's up and running now. We've run that in Southeast Asia and in the UK so far. In fact, one of the programs we ran was the headquarters of the business was actually in Singapore. Super. And we are in the process of developing a sort of an online MBA version of that for individuals. So individuals can sign up to. And while I'm plugging, book 2 is out in spring next year. So I've got all
really great.
Yeah, out next year. So that's going to be.
Can you give us a little cheat, a little peek into the workshop? I'm
very happy to. In fact, 2 minutes before I came on this call, I got the publishers they pretty well signed the manuscript off. So that's going to be about change. So that's after much debate, that's going to be called No Bullshit Change.
Yep.
I think No Bullshit is a brand we want to keep and grow. And I think it's a companion piece to the first book. The final chapter in the first book, so the last 4,000 words, I suppose, is about leading change.
Right.
I think that's an incredibly important topic, and I've written the new book entirely about leading change. It's all new material, and I think, you know, I suppose I sat down to start writing it during the pandemic, so change was very much on mine and everybody else's minds, and now look at the world we find ourselves in since then. You know, I guess the world prior to 2019 probably didn't fit it at the time, but felt like an incredibly stable and predictable place, and it doesn't feel like that anymore. And what we need is we all around us, we need leaders able to lead in the context of change and be able to lead, if you like, transformational change. So I suppose the difference between, and again, when I sit down and write, I try and think to myself, let me try and define for myself what the purpose of this book is. The purpose of the first book was very much to wipe away the bullshit around the subject of leadership, help people understand leadership. This book is going to be very much for situations where leaders, organizations find that what has served them in the past isn't going to serve them into the future. And so how do you construct and lead, think, approach change programs like that? So I'm excited for it to come out, and there's a load more stuff in there. Anybody that liked the first book, I think will love this one. And again, I think this is, change isn't just like the leadership. It isn't just for CEOs or people at the top of organizations. People leading teams of all shapes and sizes need to understand what change is and how change works, even if, for example, as most of us are, just as with leadership, even if actually you're playing your part within a larger program, just as much as if you're a leader leading your team of 20 within a larger organization. So I think it's inadvertently more relevant or more appropriate than ever. So
I just want to throw in a little like a bookmark for a whole subclass of the community that we serve, which are VC funded organizations. So they're still in their first 5 years of life. I think your particular message or messages, I'm anticipating what you're saying here based on your description of no bullshit change, is those organizations plan, it's overt. They lay out a plan where they know they will have to transform every 6 months, every 12 months, every 18 months in those early days, because they may be like, well, look, we just need to burn a ton of cash for this period of time in order to build this kind of thing. And then they know they must be a different organization in their midlife. And then they know there's a longer term goal. So change for those kinds of organizations is just built into the plan that they can see. And it's a tough thing, and they of course are inundated by the change industrial complex.
The change industrial complex. So, well, look, if any of them want to talk, I'm here. I mean, one of the, it's not rocket science, but I think a lot of change is presented as a linear process, and the fundamentals of my argument, the fundamental of my argument is that it isn't. It's a loop. Change is not always. I mean, if you're in a sports league, you could possibly argue this isn't the case. But I think even then, a lot of change is a bit like chasing a rainbow. I think you can move closer towards it. You can move a very long way towards it. So you can cover a lot of ground, but actually you might never fully hold it in your hand, because I think what's interesting about change is it is and arguably leadership as well, but let's stay with change. It's a contingent process. Change isn't something, in most situations, change is something that where you want to achieve something dramatically different into the future. But you're not doing that in isolation. You're doing that in the context of the response of your various stakeholders and your competitors. So, I mean, take a trite example. If you say, well, okay, we're gonna change because we're gonna, invest a lot more in NPD because we want to be a far more innovative business, and we're going to develop a whole lot of new products. Well, guess what? Your competitors get a vote as well. They're not just going to sit there and get on with it. And there's I won't go into the full example, but there's an example I use. It's kind of the difference between aerobatics and an aerial dogfighting. Acrobatics is about how beautifully you can fly, and all of that kind of stuff. But you know, actually dogfighting is about winning. And
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what changes. And yet it is a contingent process. You know, dogfighting, it's a contingent process. You are having to continually respond and outperform against somebody else who's trying to do the same to you.
Yeah.
And of course, leading change, you're often doing that in a context where there's way more than two variables. There's hundreds of variables. So I think that's what makes it a really interesting, intellectually interesting, and stimulating and challenging subject, as well as being, I mean, it's always relevant in the sort of PE VC world, but I think it's super relevant for everybody right now.
Well, we certainly share your view that these things are teachable, subject to improvement, that there's room to study them, reflect on them, etc. The sage's purpose in the world is to come along to organizations that don't yet have academies and build them for them. This is different. This is different than hiring external trainers. We try to build some architecture that will exist for them. It's actually an interesting step of change that medium and small organizations go through to say, hey, it's time for us to, you know, take education seriously within our ranks and to build something of our own. In that respect, of course, we believe that things can be taught, professional skills, some of which seem to be the result of pure talent or just God's gifts, actually can either be taught or improved from whatever, you know, lucky handout you got at birth. And these two topics that you've just brought up are absolutely in the bullseye. Can you lead and can you guide change?
Everything can be taught. I'm convinced of it. And there's that in the first book. There's that guy, Professor Chambliss, I think I'm pronouncing his name right. Anyway, he did a study of elite swimmers, and it's a fascinating study. And one of his conclusions was that talent is an excuse we use to explain the performance of others. And I think it's a really provocative, it's a really provocative thought, because really what he's saying is, you know what, when you go to the pool and you see that guy or woman that looks like a kind of torpedo going through the water, and you think, they're so lucky. Well, hey, none of it, 0.0 of it is luck, you're just seeing the culmination of a whole load of other teaching and, teaching, willingness to learn, and hard work. You're seeing the output of that, not talent. And I think they can be taught, and not only can be, but they should be. And I think I would urge. So it's I think it's great that's what your organization does, and I would urge your clients to sort of overinvest on teaching their people and creating an internal hierarchical learning process around leadership, because I don't think there's anything that'll give you the ROI, a greater ROI than that.
Chris, 3 minutes before you have to start doing your warm-up, your push-ups, your sit-ups, I don't know what you do, your stretches.
It's some service.
That's right. We want people to buy No Bullshit Leadership, No Bullshit Change, and to look you up in case they'd like someone who's actually, really thought this stuff through and is ready to lead it. Should they just go to Amazon? Should they go to a website? Should they hit you on LinkedIn? Give a little wayfinding.
Yeah, well, so Change book 2 comes out in spring, so you can't get that yet. But the first book is on Amazon. Is probably the easiest way, because you can get it, pretty well everywhere around the world on Amazon. You can get it as hard copy, you can get it as an ebook, and you can get it as an audio book. So go and check that out. I've just redone my website, so if you want some more resources, there's a podcast of my own, No Bullshit Leadership Podcast. We've had over 500,000 listens. We've got all sorts of interesting leaders on there. The point is to just listen to other leaders, see what they have to say. So we've got Rula Kalath, the editor of the FT. We've got Anthony Scaramucci, by the way, who's absolutely fascinating man, the former, who was famously Donald Trump's spokesperson for 10 days, and he is not what you expect. So go and Yeah, seriously, go and have a listen to him.
I
And
met
there's other
that guy in his former life when he was doing these big conferences for capital markets.
Yeah. He's quite a guy.
He really is.
And there's a load of other leadership resources on there. So go and check out the website, and there's information on the training programs on there as well. So I don't want to compete with Sage, but you know, if anybody wants to know more about our leadership training, please come and check it out, because it's a great program.
There's no competition, by the way. So the way, just as an aside, the way that we work, we just build the architecture and the space, and then it gets filled up with folks just like yourself.
Right. Okay. Well, here I am. I am. I can help you fill some of that. Happy to talk to you about filling that higher infrastructure for you.
Lovely.
With you.
Lovely. Chris, go get them. Go get them.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to an update on just an immaculate tennis score.
Well, I hope so.